Come on, YouTube, catch up. Howdy. Welcome to Tuesday, folks. We're gonna let people get in. For those that see the ad, get past that, all that kind of stuff before we get into the topic. Oh, I think I sat down to my computer about 3 minutes ago. It hasn't been very long. Um, it's been a heck of a week. So while we wait for folks to kind of stream in and settle in, I want to go over a couple things. Number one, I actually want to directly answer something in chat. So from MedCow74, am I copying KGTropicals? Did you read the description? You did. That's okay. So yeah, John and Lisa actually talked about kind of this topic, and I caught, I think, like 20 minutes of it while I was doing some work last week. And I actually really liked the topic because what little I got to hear, mostly from John, it was one of the times where he was weighing in a lot of his opinion. I like the topic, and I kind of wanted to give my own perspective because it's very different in every neck of the woods, and like we get different feedback from people, and we see different things. We have different experiences naturally, right? Just because of our own personal backgrounds, the fish we keep. You know, why would I copy KGTropicals? No, because Oscars suck. Being inflammatory on purpose. But yeah. No, so like, I really like the topic. I didn't really get to hear the whole stream, so I had like a little 20 minutes of it or whatever. And I kind of wanted to weigh in on the same thing because I felt it was a really good thing to talk about. But yeah. So people laugh in chat. Joe Davis is making duck and hoisin sauce pizza. That's, wow. That's interesting. That's some like some highfalutin pizza as far as I'm concerned, man. I mean, like, I'm from the West Coast, so like I'm of the school that pineapple belongs on pizza. But I also like just a generic, like, most of the stuff pizza. Like, I love bell pepper and onion and all that kind of stuff on my pizza. But the only thing I don't like is mushroom or anchovy, because I don't like fish in general. I don't eat fish. Fish are my friends, not my food. So yeah, we'll talk the topic. Okay, never mind. Danikin Aquatics. Thank you very much. I am having a plantastic day. I actually was looking at some of my plants before I ran out the door furiously this morning to get to work. As I sit there feeding my fish, and there's a bunch of trims that I have floating in the running river tank, and I was sitting there going like, really need to do something with those. Whether it's get rid of them, replant some of them, whatever it may be. But I'm sitting there staring at my plants for a second, going, I need to deal with that, and I need to deal with this other mess in another tank, which is the you guys know the giant swath of Java fern Wendelov that's in the Guppy Mansion. Well, part of the branches of Cholla wood that was holding it up broke. So it's just like kind of free floating at this like extreme angle like this, right? And it's a massive chunk. I mean, this chunk is probably 2 foot long and another like foot and a half front to back. I mean, it's this massive concoction, if you will, of just all this really well grown in. It's all grown together and created its own like network of roots, like some giant branch of its own. It's just, it doesn't have enough weight to hold it down anymore, so it's just kind of free floating, all weird. I got work to do, but you know it's like, no rest for the wicked. I've always got something I have to get done. Let's get on topic for a sec. I think you guys might have, and like definitely chat, please weigh in as I'm talking, because I feel like every different person has a different opinion, right? So there's two kind of what I think sides to this tale. I think both are true. Fish stores are both dying and thriving. And let me explain. Like, you guys well know that I live in the Seattle area. I am close. It's like an hour drive, but I'm close to Aquarium Co-op. very clearly a store that is thriving, right? I mean, even in the human malware times, when I've tried to go there on Saturdays, there's a line, right? Because they only allow so many people in the store. They're doing what they can to be safe and to keep running, all that kind of stuff. So you'll have like a line of like 6 or 7 people, and they're all nicely socially distanced, waiting to get in. And that's on top of now that they hand out those little like the buzzers you get at restaurants, so you can just wait in your car. People will just sit out there and they'll like jabber jaw back and forth with each other about fish, waiting to go into the co-op, which is kind of cool, right? It's a neat experience. I tend to go at like weird hours, so I can just like slide in, grab whatever I need, and run away. But there's the opposite story, right? There are one of the fish stores that is a sponsor of the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society, or at least was for a long time. They had to pull back their sponsorship and stop offering their club discount they used to do because they were hurting so much. They don't have any online presence, right? They're just an in-person shop. They're in the middle of Seattle, so it's very expensive property to begin with, right? And they're really hurting. Thankfully, they're starting to recover and they're starting to get back, so it doesn't look like they're going to close. But I have seen other stores close recently, and I've noticed a pattern. And there's one that's like on, I hate to say it like this, but on death's door, and it's they all kind of follow a pattern. From my experience, the ones that are dying are one of two things. Either A, they're the really old stores that have never changed. They've never changed the way, so they're typically like concrete floor, kind of dim lighting, have that like fish store smell where they just smell wet and dank, or they cater to things that aren't very popular in the area. So an example would be like in the late 80s, early 90s, African cichlids were extremely popular in the Seattle area. But it takes a lot of work to keep African cichlids when your natural water is super soft, right? So what happened? People started getting tired of doing all the work, and as Planet tanks became more and more popular, in the early thousands especially, it became easier to understand and what to do. What we now know, is like basically the aquarium co-op style store where there's plant focused, small nano fish, maybe some bigger stuff like your rainbows and stuff, but nothing too crazy, start becoming more and more popular, and those fish stores started to go away. And the few that have like held on, basically, they really never changed. And this is common. You can see this in chat already coming up, talking about things where it's not necessarily like the big box stores that are killing them. In some cases, it kills certain parts of their business because there used to be an old fish store mentality that they could charge a ton for things, and that was okay, right? But now we're seeing more and more like you have to have competitive pricing. You generally need some level of online presence. It doesn't necessarily have to be online selling. That helps, but you need something, some form of social media interaction or something that helps you facilitate your business, especially in tough times like a pandemic, right? Being able to get the message out, being able to talk to people. Because if people are just going to if you rely purely on people driving by your store in a hobby that has declined in the digital age, although in the pandemic there's been a rise of fish keeping, which is very good. There's a lot of like stuff that plays against that. Like one of the stores that I know, it's been around since the 70s, right? They haven't changed a thing of what they do. It's still like the tanks are barely lit. You go back in the fish section and it's dark. It doesn't smell good. It's not the cleanest place in the world. You have to be a really committed fish person to want to go into that place and keep looking around. Now you look at the opposite, would be aquarium co-op, a store that I really want to show you guys soon. if she'll let me film, is a store that I occasionally show their online store, which is Aquaria. They're an ADA store. They're beautiful. My buddy Jason, Redfish, Bluefish, right? These are, and his especially is interesting because he's a store that's still building, right? It's still basically, you get to watch it evolve and become a store as opposed to just like purely an online business. They're clean. They don't smell funny. They're upkept well, right? You don't go in and see tons of tanks like coated in algae or with dead fish everywhere. Like, all these things are old mentalities were just like, oh, fish keepers will just know that that's normal. But modern fish keepers don't want to deal with that, because if you get someone like me, right, or Alyssa Bentley, who's in chat, who I gave a 90-gallon tank to over the weekend, get it out of my house and get it to her, where it will see a lovely home for her big goldfish. You know, we go into a store and we see dead fish. Our first thought is, what kind of disease am I going to put in a tank if I get these things? Or how much work am I going to have to do in quarantine to make sure they're healthy? How many of your tanks are on the same system? And that means how many of them are all potentially sick, right? You get these things like, I have this store they've been struggling a lot, and I can tell they're struggling a lot. And I'm not a huge fan of them personally. I refer to it as the pirate ship. And it's an old building. It looks dated from the outside. It's even more dated and clustered and not very. It's a mixed like pet store, so it's not just fish, but like you go to the fish section and it's just like, toward the back of the store, it's like full of all sorts of used gear that's not clean, and you have no clue what's for sale, what isn't for sale. It is a mess, right? And it's one of those things where, like, I look at a store like that and it's the perfect example of what I see that is dying in this pandemic. You have lots of old mentalities that haven't evolved to business. And business, like retail, that's the thing. I think a lot of people get into owning a fish shop as it's their own kind of personal club space. Or they love fish. They were selling fish out of their garage or their house or whatever it may be, and just thought, well, I can open a store and I can keep a store, but they don't necessarily have business savvy or retail savvy, especially because I hit on this part a lot. If you go into a store and you're just walking by, maybe you don't keep fish, or maybe you remember like, oh, I had a fish tank when I was a kid. That was fun. Maybe I'll go look in the fish store. Just remember what it was like to be a kid. Right? That's part of how I got back into the hobby. I remember I came across a random video on YouTube, and it's like, man, I remember having fish as a kid. I loved having fish as a kid. I would spend hours staring at my tanks, just in peace, and love just watching my fish swim. Why don't I have that in my life anymore? Why don't I have that still? I should look at doing this again. Like, I can think about when I got back into fish. And I went to a couple different local stores while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to keep. Right? And there's a store that I've known for a long time. They're not very far from my house. And I remember going there first, and one of the first things I remember is like, oh yeah, there's this that kind of like the fish tank smell, right? If you have too many fish tanks in a room, you get that natural moisture and humidity. There's a scent to it. Right? If you're used to like not having the moisture levels higher and elevated. And I look at that and I can think of myself back then, just like how that made me go, maybe I don't want to get back into this. Am I sure? Now think about that now, when in some cases money is very tight for people, or you're in some states, like you basically can't go anywhere, right? You can't do anything. So if you're going to bring something into your house, you have to be really committed to it because you're going to spend a lot of time with it. So that's why you see like, there's this rash of like dog and cat adoptions for a while. Okay, I have to mention this from chat right away. So Kelly Foreman, my local fish store has orange shag carpeting. If that doesn't scream like 70s, I don't know what. And here's another one, yogurt covered mirror. Questionable name, but my old local fish store was struggling way before the pandemic and closed at the beginning. He was a great fish keeper, just not a business owner. And I think you're gonna see more and more of this, unfortunately, in that the stores that are not business minded, they're fish minded, and I hate to say this like it's a negative, because we want the fish to be healthy. We want great fish keepers opening stores or maintaining stores. We want that old knowledge to be around. But if you're not thinking as a business needs to think, it's going to be impossible to survive in this environment. Even as things are coming back, the ones that are going to thrive are the ones who have adapted to modern retail business. You're a retail business. Yes, you are dealing in live animals, but in the end, you're retail. And the thing is, I think the biggest problem that a lot of fish stores are going to struggle with is those who are unwilling to do the work it takes to get that extra increase from the modern things that businesses need to do. Social media is one of them. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a YouTube channel or have a post on Instagram every day, although it certainly helps to have some of those things, right? Because it allows more people to interact with your store, get an idea of who you are, what you do, what makes you special, right? Think about the Aquarium Co-op, right? Aquarium Co-op started as a very small store, but it's Corey's business savvy and letting people peek in. Like, I can remember when I first started watching day in the fish store, right? A day in the life of a fish store was amazing. It was so cool to like see what it was like from his perspective as a fish store owner, and that kind of connection you got. So I can remember the first time I went into the store, I had a really good feeling for who Corey was as a person. I already know who I'm dealing with, like I'd been going to that store for months. And so when I went in, we had a very short chat. I just kind of looked around. I talked to him a little bit about the tank I was building and what my ideas were, and got some suggestions. It was perfect. So I bought a couple things there because I was taking my time. I was being patient about it because I'd been watching lots of videos. But think about the person who maybe hasn't kept fish in a while or is just going to try starting with fish. Their experience walking into a store like that, right? Those stores, especially a store, can be like, oh yeah, no, if you want to learn something, we have blog articles on our website, or we have these resources here, or hey, we're partnered with the local fish club. For those that have fish clubs, if you go to their meetings, or they have this way of communication, there's lots of ways to learn extra stuff. We do deals with them where you get a discount through us if you're a member of the club, all this kind of stuff, right? You have these naturally organic relationships partially through social media and partially just through modern day understanding of business that will help you catapult as a business into what is successful. The ones that do that stuff are the ones that are thriving. I think John and Lisa from KGTropicals, they've got a store that they're going to film, or you can see like something fishy, right? It actually had popped into chat like right as I was about to leave. I think about these stores that have adapted from what they were to what they need to do. in modern times to survive, and especially in the pandemic. So I want to look through a couple things in chat because there were some other things I know that I saw while I was kind of on my own personal ramble fest. But there was some really good stuff, and I really want to go over this because I think it's really important to see the differences in various areas. So like my family lives on the eastern side of the state, and basically the only thing over there when it comes to fish is, you know, like Petco's and PetSmarts, right? And almost exclusively Petco, because all the old mom and pop stores went the way of the dodo. And a lot of that tended to be like they wouldn't compete on price, thinking they could keep charging a ton. And in like that's another thing in modern day times where like if you go to Jim Bob's aquarium store, right, and Jim Bob wants $500 for an FX6, and you can go on Amazon or you can go to Petco and they want $330 or whatever the heck it is, why are you going to spend so much more with Jim Bob, right? Or you go to the Wet Spot Tropical Fish online and you see that, oh, I can buy this super red bristlenose Plecostomus for $25, and your local store needs as asking $50. You know, it's one of those things where like you see those discrepancies in prices. That's a really old school fish store mentality. Why would you ever pay it in modern times, right? So Stephen P. mentioned this. My local fish store is breaking down their saltwater section and expanding freshwater. Don't know what that means for their business health, but it's good news to me. Most likely what that means is that they're not selling enough saltwater to justify keeping it, and they are selling enough freshwater that if they expand their freshwater selection and what they carry and the space that they're using, they feel they'll probably justify that in sales by widening their ability to keep more supply, just whether it's fish, whether it's plants, whatever it may be. Very clearly, like that tells you salt water in your area does not sell for them. Freshwater does. So they need to focus entirely on freshwater in order to keep healthy, keep their business going, keep profitable, live, right? You know, there's tons of stuff. Joe Davis, another great comment here. Without an online presence and high overheads would be a killer unless you're using guerrilla tactics. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's really tough to do certain things, especially in the fish industry. Paul Soltero out here in Southeast North Carolina, it's big box or nothing. There's one local fish store in the area that had some promise when it opened, but now it's mostly disappointment. It does both salt and fresh. And I think that's one of the other things that very few stores that I've seen that carry a wide variety of things, and by that I mean like we carry some African cichlids and some saltwater and some of this and some of that, succeed compared to the ones that really specialize. Because often what you end up doing is either one, you have to have somebody that keeps all those things in the shop regularly to educate people as they're coming in or to understand the people as they come in. Or two, the amount of work you have to do is so different section to section that it's like managing 4 small stores instead of one fish store, right? Or however many like different major differences you have in your fish. I can think of like the one that's closest to me, little place, and it's a wonderful little store called Sierra Fish and Pets. It's an old mom and pop. It's been around for a long time, and they're a full out pet store, right? They have some birds. They carry all sorts of dog and cat food. They have a great fish section, but their fish section is split. So there's a little bit of freshwater, there's some salt water, and there's a section of African cichlids. And I can remember talking to them at one point, and they needed a saltwater person. They didn't have a saltwater specialist working in the store anymore because the person who used to work there moved out of the state. And it's very hard especially if you're competing with specialized saltwater stores, to get the people who know saltwater that want to work in a pet store, right? Pet stores are kind of synonymous with not necessarily paying all that well. Some pay significantly better than others. There's, you know, guys like Aquarium Co-op where they very firmly talk about how in order to keep their good staff, they just have to pay more, and it's just built into their business model. And I think that's one of the things you'll see is like the stores that are more spread wide are the ones that are having the hardest time right now. And part of that is just all the extra work required and the extra cost involved, especially if your business is slowing down in a time where a lot of people can't necessarily go out and do as much stuff as they want, or they're much tighter on their budget because maybe one member of the household got laid off, or you're dealing with unemployment, right? Whatever it may be, like this is a tough time for a lot of people across the globe, but especially like it's easiest for me to understand in the United States, right? Because that's where I am, that's where I see all the numbers. But universally speaking, in the world, it's tough right now. It's tough for a lot of places and a lot of people. So if you're tight on your budget, are you going to spend money at a fish store, or are you going to worry about like your roof and the food on your plate? Right? So when you get those things that start instantly costing more, salt water, for example, saltwater equipment and fish, it's all very, very expensive. You might see a huge drop off in business. And I've noticed this from the local saltwater stores. And I'm not a saltwater guy, but I kind of like keep my ear to the ground because I've got friends that are into salt and they try to convince me all the time. Some of the saltwater stores are the ones that are hurting the most in the Seattle area. And the Seattle area is like the least impacted by the pandemic. Just because there's so much tech and stuff out here that the overall economy here is doing pretty well. So like Fishy Snowman saying that he's in New York City, the New Jersey, Pennsylvania area. All the stores are thriving out there. And I think part of that has to do with the major metropolitan areas tend to be doing a little bit better. But, man, some stores are really hurting. And I hope that they survive, but they have to adapt, right? That's the biggest thing. Kyle's Aquarometrics. I'm in the DC area and we have 5 or 6 within an hour, which is awesome, but one of them is definitely thriving, and it's super old school. That's really impressive. When the old schools could thrive, it's interesting to figure out what they're doing that keeps them thriving. Because very clearly, based on what you're saying, like the rest are so-so and or are way overpriced. So they're probably keeping, at least the new school mentality, they're keeping their pricing competitive, right? And their pricing reasonable. Because it's old school fish stores were not like that. Or at least none of the ones I've ever experienced, and I've experienced them across. Every time we used to travel when I was a kid, when we would go on vacations, if I could find a way to go into a fish store, I would. Because I liked seeing fish so much, and it was interesting to see how they were different. So I've seen fish stores in a lot of different states, but most of that's like in the 80s and 90s when it was way different. You didn't have online the way it is now, right? That kind of facilitates reasonable pricing across stuff. Metcalf, I'm in the Philadelphia suburb. The stores that were good are still good, and the ones that suck still suck. And no new ones have opened, but none have closed. So that's important to know. Like, for some reason, some are just, they're hanging on, right? They haven't died out yet. And I've noticed this in other like hobbies too. Like for instance, you guys know I'm a gamer. Like game stores have been really struggling, except for the ones that have strong online presence. It's interesting stuff. But yeah, I think a lot of it is like Fishy Mailman's really hitting this on the head. One thing I think is important. If you're paying attention to like the analytics of your store, so like you're looking at what sells and what doesn't sell, you're probably making the right decisions, and that's helping the most to either thrive or at least survive. And then you've also got the last one I want to cover, which Kyle's Aquarometrics. Thank you. You're basically branching me into this perfectly. I don't know I've gotten long on this one, guys. Don't worry, Q&A's coming. It's tough when you have great sources like Dan's Fish and Aquatic Arts. Makes it tough to justify taking a gamble on a place that has unknown care procedures. So online sellers, right? Online sellers that are doing stuff a specific way. You get to see their process, especially like Dan's Fish. He's on YouTube. He shows you stuff all the time. Aquatic Arts is just, they've been growing like gangbusters. It's great for them. You know how they work. You know how they operate. You know how they do things. You know the end product you're going to receive. Sometimes you're paying a little bit more of a premium for that. Yes. But usually you pay that premium so that you don't have to deal with all the problems that they've dealt with for you, right? So like, I buy from Dan's Fish. You guys know that. I love Dan's Fish. I'm probably going to buy more fish from him soon, actually. I need more females for one of my rainbow fish tanks. But I know that he's done all the medication and quarantine work for me. So I don't need to worry typically about having meds on hand and medicating fish when they come in. I just have to make sure that I properly acclimate them and just monitor them for a little bit. That's peace of mind, and that's worth paying a few extra bucks a fish for, right? Because it means that I don't have to deal with all that work. I don't have to waste the money on meds. I don't have. There's a ton of stuff I don't have to do because I know that's already been done for me, and I know through not only personal history of making purchases, but also through watching on YouTube, I know what's going on. And I've watched Dan like literally go like, yeah, you see this fish here? He's not doing so well. He's not sellable. Something's going on. He's got this like defect in his fin, right? When they call that out on themselves, you know that the end product you're receiving is very, very nice. And I hate to like treat animals, living beings of any form like a product, but we have to keep that in mind, right? That's the proper retail mindset. You don't want to sell that thing that is going to cause a problem in the first place. Heaven forbid. That's like buying really, really cheap stuff and then expecting it to live forever. Paul Soltero. I recently got an order from the Wet Spot. The ordering process is a little archaic. I will admit the Wet Spot does need to evolve there. But the variety and quality is outstanding. Yeah, they're fantastic. I'm sorry, Chris Trapp's just game stonks. I have to laugh at that. For those that haven't followed, like the joke, the internet meme as it is, that is the GameStop stock price. I've watched that with a great amount of glee, because if you don't know, I used to work at a GameStop way, way back in college. And I don't have any love for that place, but it is really funny to watch some of the things that are going on. All right, with all that being said, we will get into the question and answer time. So yeah, I mean, I really want to hear from you guys. For those who are watching, like, leave comments, please. I want to hear about your local area. For those that have local fish stores, or did you lose a fish store? Do you have a fish store that has recently opened, or just like has changed the way it does things, and it's either thriving or it's just barely hanging on? I really want to know. For those of you who are watching the replay, for those of you who are in chat, keep barraging chat. Go for it. I love reading this kind of stuff. It's very interesting to me to get like the pulse on other people's places, because I've seen it here locally. I've watched certain fish that are certain fish stores that are really struggling, and others that are just like, yeah, we've never done more business than we are now. We're struggling to keep up. We have so much opportunity right now. It's pretty crazy to watch. So with that being said, if you have a question, at Bentley Pasco makes it super easy for me to see. And if for some reason I do not answer your question here live, you are welcome to shoot me an email, bentley.pasco@gmail.com. And I will get back to it typically within about 3 days. That's just a heads up. That's about my lead time right now, because work is real crazy for me. But I've actually caught up on email as of earlier today. So there were a few that were lying around that I had to catch up on. I caught up on a few of them this morning, got them taken care of, got the rest done while I was at lunch, and bang, it was just good to go. Oh man, okay. So I have to mention this, yogurt covered mirror. Conway Tropical Fish Stores was my local, but closed at the beginning of the pandemic. So you moved to Aquarium Co-op. So cool, you're local. That's awesome. And I happen to know that like Conway in particular, unfortunately, it was like the owner had a massive health issue, and that's why his store basically just closed down. He was trying to find a way to make stuff work and couldn't. It's really unfortunate, because I have friends that who used to go to Conway. Actually, Leanne and her son, that's where I got my current super red bristlenose, and where like all of the blue Hawaiian Moscow guppies came from. They used to go to Conway. That was the closest store to them. No longer can, which really, really sucks, because it was just a generically old school fish store, been around for a long time. Owner knew his stuff pretty well, but it's one of those places where like you kind of like going there, because it's kind of like stepping back into the past a little bit, but not in a horrible way. Right? It was kind of fun. It's like you'd walk back and like what it was like being in a fish store in the 70s and 80s, but it was still thriving for quite a while. And even like Corey used to work there a long, long time ago. So it's kind of interesting to see that stuff. Okay, the fishy mailman. What are the odds of me getting Hygrophila augustifolia to live without CO2? So, augustifolia can. The biggest real problem is that often other like plants in a tank that will keep with something like augustifolia, so other stems, choke it out. And the big thing is like the CO2 matters for helping it consume more nutrients and have the amount of carbon it wants without having to fight too hard for the other plants in a system. So certain plants with CO2 and without act so differently that they can get really, really messed with by other plants that are far more like whether it's nitrate aggressive or what have you. Um, I've had augustifolia and I've had it without CO2. It is tough. It's much easier with even like a tiny amount of CO2. We're talking like, a 40 breather that's got like 2 bubbles a second happening of CO2. That small amount means so much for that plant as far as making it like go from kind of tough to like brain dead simple. But it's possible. Do not get me wrong. It's just not easy. And there's some other stuff. But there's some small nutrient needs that augustifolia has that are a little different. It's kind of like how Java Fern's a potassium hog and that kind of stuff. There's some small little things you want to do. The biggest thing would be something like anything that promotes root growth and root health is really, really important with augustifolia. You'd be surprised, especially if you're not running CO2. So having those additional trace elements present that facilitate that growth is really, really critical. Oh, So one after that, I want to. Okay. So Metcalf, short suggestion on how a tank's cycle could crash besides pH crash. So, if you were to, let's say, have a massive boost in whether it was plant die-off, algae growth, some major swing, right? Even if it's like a huge plant boost and then all of a sudden like you stop fertilizing for a couple weeks and you start getting a lot of die-off, and that will cause big swings in potentially ammonia, nitrite that normally would not be present. That can cause a effective crash that isn't pH. So it'll crash your bacteria in the sense that it overloads it. And it don't think of it like crash isn't necessarily the right word, but think of all these things like overloads, right? You're doing something outside the parameters of what the system is ready to handle. You're overloading some kind of boundary. So you're pressing outside what it can handle, and that's causing a major problem. So like usually we think of all this like pH crash or like but you could have another great example would be if you were to go and do a super deep gravel vac and you've never gone and you have like really deep substrate that's kind of compacted and you've never done that before. You could stir up pockets of anaerobic bacteria. It gets exposed to a bunch of oxygen. You basically kill off all of that anaerobic bacteria, and maybe it was processing some amount of nitrate in your tank that you weren't aware of. And now you have a massive nitrate spike. Or some other, like similar, you could just have an ammonia spike from all this bacteria dying off, right? Now you're overloading the system, and it effectively crashes some critical portion of your system, and you run into issues with your fish health, or you could have it go septic, which is really scary. If a tank goes septic, that's super scary. My buddy Alex from Secret History Living Inside Your Aquarium, he's had a tank go septic before, and it's just like everything dies. Everything dies. I think he had like a fish survive. It was a nightmare. It even killed all his plants. It was just horrible. So, kind of a short like understanding that think of it less like crash and more of something in your system has gone outside of its capability to handle it. It's pushed way beyond its boundary, whether that's negative, down, or up, right? Too much ammonia, that's up. You somehow like stopped enough oxygenation to where your aerobic bacteria has died off. That's down, right? Now, that's a huge down. Now we can't process ammonia at all, and that ammonia is going to build up. There's a lot of like little ways that you could have crashes, but pH is just the most common one to occur. Stephen B. Something that the LFS employees couldn't answer: EDTA versus DTPA versus ferrous gluconate. Can pH really affect the type of iron absorbable by plants that much? So this is where you're getting into the level of science that is outside of my personal understanding. However, where I can talk about is that if you are using, typically it is, was potassium, or is it phosphate? I think it's phosphorus, that interacts with iron if it's not the right type of iron, which is typically like chelated iron is what we most commonly have. And there's different formulations, I know. But that tends to be where weird interactions start to occur. However, other than if your pH is higher because there's naturally a significantly more alkaline, higher mineral content, and that can kind of slow the way that plants handle things, I can't really answer like the full details between those compounds because I don't know. That's a level of science that should be reserved for someone like a Crystal Castleman, a Karen Randall, like a proper botanist. I'm just some chucklehead who's done a lot of stuff in a fish tank. I am not a botanist at all. I actually recently had someone commenting a lot who like likes to start every content with like I'm a scientist or as a scientist, and then they have a lot of like really snooty comments. It's been very interesting to read them from the perspective of someone who's like, I know enough about science to like not like completely have my head buried in the sand, but at the same time like to read things where you can tell stuff that tells you all you need to know about a person in a sentence or two. You know, you guys know what I'm saying? Where like you can tell just like, oh, you're that person who thinks so much of themselves that you're looking past one of the most beneficial parts about not going overly scientific in things, which is that it's digestible, right? Like I try to, when I'm building most of my videos, this was in some of like Filtration 101 had a lot of comments from this, and that person's probably gonna get angry, and I don't care. But they were like really pissy about certain things, and I was just like, you understand that part of the purpose is to make it digestible so that people can understand the high level concept, and then if they want to learn more science, they're equipped with what they need in order to have their starting point and go investigate further on their own. If you go highly detailed in the science right off the kick, what happens? The average person just tunes completely out. But if you make it easy and digestible, people learn things. It's like it's like that's why often you'll like see me go like, yeah, I don't want to get too scientific, and then I've got like some of my friends that are like, no, please go as scientific as you can. It's like, one, I'm not a scientist. Come on, I can't answer everything perfectly without researching forever, which I suppose you could say I could do. But yeah, it's about making information digestible that gets some level of science into the minds of other fish keepers, so that they can, now they have a base understanding. Go, oh, you know, learning that wasn't so hard. Maybe I can learn more. Right? At least that's how I look at things. But what do I know? I'm just some dum-dum that keeps fish on YouTube. Triton, Riverstone. The two local fish stores near me are Animal City in Marlboro, Tennessee? Is that? I'm curious how that's supposed to be pronounced. And Aquatic Critter in Nashville. They rock and are doing well. Do African cichlids, need salt, and any ideas on how to keep the pH. So with African cichlids, one of the easiest ways if your water is softer is to have either you can do like chemical buffer compounds. So this would be like Seachem makes like Lake Tanganyika buffer, Lake Malawi buffer, right? There's something you add to the water. Never add that stuff with the fish. Mix it in some water on its own until it dilutes fully. Then pour that now solution, if you will, that concentrated solution into the water during your water changes, if you pour the salts directly in and they contact the fish, some of those salts can, in direct contact, actually cause burns or mess with their slime coat. So just never pour and most of them are a type of salt, but never pour those buffering compounds directly into the fish tank water. It's a big risk. Likeliness of it actually causing problems is kind of low because most of those fish like run away during water changes, but just my advice, never pour it directly in. Always make a solution in like a water bottle and then pour that solution in. It's much, much safer that way. The other way is to get things like crushed coral, crushed oyster shell, like Texas, some of the rocks that leach a lot of minerals like Texas Holy Rock, and put those in there. They will help buffer your water up naturally so that all you have to do is pour water straight out of the tap and a little of the chlorinator and you're okay. I did a mixture of things when I used to keep my shell dwellers, and when I go back to them, I'll probably do similar, where I used aragonite sand to help as my buffer, and then I used a small amount of like tang buffer to help push it up even further because my water's so soft and very basic. It's not very alkaline at all. So in order to push toward like 9 pH, if I wanted to go really high, which that's what those fish like, and that's what they breed in most regularly, I could get their pH to close to 8 just by using the aragonite sand, and then I would use like Lake Tanganyika buffer every once in a while to push it a little bit higher to get that extra content in there in order to get them, if I'm like trying to get more babies out of them or something like that. Most of those fish can like handle wider parameters than you might think, though. Don't like rely on this is what they live in the wild, because most of the ones that are kept in captivity don't necessarily live in the same water conditions that they did in the wild. Xanadu, okay, chat jumped, but basically, my local fish store is about 30 minutes away. Has a small selection, but doing well during the pandemic. That's great. Great to hear. I love hearing the fish stores are doing well, because, yeah, man, that matters. Speaking of your iron thing from Paul Soltero, somebody's far smarter than me. Terrestrial plants, so not aquatic, but terrestrial plants, pH affects the ability of the plants to absorb iron, resulting in chlorosis, which chlorosis is the discoloration in general we refer to as a form of chlorosis, but that's the most common way, the easiest way to think of it is like whenever a plant that should be green is yellow or brown or has spots, this is a type of chlorosis. There's lots of different versions of it and specific deficiencies, but that's the easiest way to understand what chlorosis is for those who want to know. Quirky Lemon, off-topic question. I remember saying that you played Magic the Gathering. Do you do other trading card games? I'm about to make my first Pokemon deck. Currently, I do not play any other trading card games. I used to play Pokemon when it first came out, so I played the very first set, and was it Jungle, the first expansion set that came out? I played those two. I've played lots of other card games that most people have never heard of. So, and there's some that maybe you have. So, like, I played Legend of the Five Rings. There was Vampire, the Eternal Struggle, right? I'm trying to remember. It used to be called Jihad originally, but it became, like, I think it's Vampire, the Eternal Struggle is what it changed into. Most recently, the last card game other than Magic that I played was the Final Fantasy trading card game. I actually used to organize events and run tournaments for that for quite a while. And that was right before I really got more serious about YouTube. So I was doing YouTube a little bit here and there, but I wasn't as serious as I am now, where I have a dedicated schedule and stuff like that. And I think I actually there's still some random Final Fantasy cards around my house. Actually, one sec. There's... Oh, nope. I think I moved this. I had these... Oh, nope. Here it is. I dusted it off a little bit. Whoop. So this is a starter deck, or a demo kit, rather, for Final Fantasy's trading card game that I have left over from the tail end of when I was playing. I sold, my whole collection off to a guy that was... basically got into selling singles and stuff, and it became something where the local store I used to run events at, they'd stopped really running anything, weren't ordering product, and all the people who used to play there stopped playing. So it became one of those things where I was starting to work more, and I wanted to spend more time with my YouTube stuff, so I gave up on that particular card game. But I've played tons and tons of Spellfire, Magi Nation, Deadlands. Uh, there's a ton. The Star Trek and Star Wars TCGs when they came out a long time ago back in the 90s. Like, I played a lot of stuff when it was in the 90s. Basically, or Netrunner was another one that I used to play. I've played a lot of different card games, and in the end, it basically comes down to there's only two that I ever really loved the most. The only other one was, no, I'm forgetting this, a game called Anime Mayhem, so it's an anime-based card game. It was really unique and interesting. I was a multiple-time state champion for that particular game right before it basically, like, fell off the face of the planet, and now there's, like, all sorts of other stuff, but I've kind of, like, found that the more and more I get into it, like, I play Magic because of the group of people I play with. It's about the friends, not necessarily the game, and all the other ones, like, I just don't have time for them. I barely have time to play, like, the couple of video games that interest me the most. So, like, most of my side hobbies that I used to play, I've just stopped. Just kind of the nature of growing up, getting old. I saw a super chat. There was a sticker. I need to get that to a second. And then Triton Riverstone, welcome to becoming a member. Thank you so much. But interesting question. I like it. Man, Mr. Singh, he's like a better YouTuber than I am. He's got people hit the like button. I ignore that so much, man. I think part of it is just like, I don't care. I have more fun talking to you guys. Chubby Guppy, thank you for the hippos. I appreciate it, my friend. It's good to see you, buddy. I really want to... I don't want to necessarily go to an American Library Association convention, but there's a lot of, like, the Guppy nerds that I know who we've all, like, come to keep the Moscow Guppy that I really just want to, like, get in a room or, like, sit down, have a meal with, and just banter about, like, our own personal observations with that fish, because I'm such a psycho when it comes to that one fish. I love that fish so much. Samuel Mendoza. I've been trying to carpet my shrimp tank with Monte Carlo for the past few weeks in a high-tech setup, but it hasn't even taken off. What tips can you give specific to this plant? So, it likes a lot of light. It does like CO2. It is also a massive calcium hog, and I think this is the one thing that doesn't get talked about enough about Monte Carlo, is that it actually needs a lot of calcium to be healthy. So, if you're seeing some struggles with that plant, it looks like color looks okay, it's just not growing very fast, try supplementing extra calcium, or like get some crushed coral in a small bag in your filter, whatever it may be, to get extra calcium in the water. Typically, I have found good results with Monte Carlo when that's happening, if the Monte Carlo is not doing so well beforehand. I hope that helps. Let's see here. Son of a Quack. What a name. I like that name. Damn, didn't Corey also play Magic Gathering? Yeah, to my knowledge, Corey plays Magic. We actually talked a little bit about Magic when he came over to the Fish Room Tour, because he had mentioned, like, yeah, I'm kind of thinking about getting back into it. I think now he's going camping, so he's probably not going to get into it. But, I mean, Magic the Gathering, Wizards of the Coast, the company that makes Magic, is actually in Washington State. So their headquarters is like 15 minutes from my house. So they're in Renton, Washington. So yeah, it's kind of like it started here, right? It was really big here in the very, very early days. I think I've played it far more competitively than Corey ever did, in the sense that, like, at one point I was qualified for the professional tour for Magic. I stopped caring after a while. When I was a lot younger, I was really, really into it. I played it a lot. I used to go to lots of tournaments. Even in my 20s, I went to a lot of tournaments, but just as I got older, I've found that other things were far more important in my life than going to a room typically full of people with bad hygiene. It's the unfortunate part about certain gamers, like, man, just some folks need to learn that, like, deodorant in a shower is your best friend. And I hate to rag on gamers, right? Because a lot of guys that I know that, like, play Magic are socially awkward. They're great people. They don't necessarily have a lot of interactions with people outside of playing Magic, and Magic is like a room full of nerds, right? I used to joke, I'm probably going to run a little late tonight. Just a heads up, Dr. Black's going to come on in about 20 minutes-ish, but I know I'm getting way off fish subject, but you guys tend to like little dives into my personal life, so I'll tell you this. Back, and I've said this before because I think it applies to fish nerds, but back when I was like I think 30, which it sounds like it's so long ago, but I mean, we're talking almost a decade at this point. I can remember being at a Magic event, and one of the younger guys who was still in high school, it was coming in on a Friday to play Magic, and he brought his girlfriend with him. And he was a good-looking dude, played sports. He was getting a minor sports scholarship for wrestling to go to college, and his beautiful girlfriend, right? She comes in, she's a very, very sweet lady. She's meeting all these like nerdy dudes hanging out, and like, and we sat down and talked with her for a little bit. And I'm like, "Can I give you a piece of life advice?" And of course, she's like looking at this like old gray-haired fat guy, going like, "What the what? No, I don't care what you have to say." And I go, "If you ever want to guarantee that you're going to have a guy that will never cheat on you, date a guy that goes into a game store to play Magic every Friday night." And she looked at me like I had grown an extra head. And I said, "I want you to think about it like this. If he was at a bar, he'd be at a place where there's, one, things that naturally mess with your brain and tell you to do dumb stuff. And two, lots of women. Look around. How many women are in the game store playing Magic?" And she like looked around, and it was herself and a mom with her kids. And that was it. Right? and there were like 40 people in the store. It was a busy store. And she just like looked at me and went, "You're right." I've always preached like for younger women especially, like if it's not something you can't stand, because there are plenty of women like they hate video games, they hate this, they hate that. I get it, right? Everybody's got a personal taste. Find nerdy people, because they're already so socially awkward that the likeliness that they're ever going to hit on anyone else is zilch, right? They're never going to leave you. Because if you let them go play their nerd thing every Friday night and you just relax, you hang out with your girlfriends or whatever the heck it may be, they'll love you forever. So we don't stand a chance, we nerd people. Carson Bainbridge, Bentley, any tips on African dwarf frogs? I've never kept them. For me personally, I'm not a big like frog person at all, like frogs, toads, any of those. So I've never had the appeal. From my understanding, though, just in general, they like a little bit of hardness in the water, and they're super peaceful, and they bounce up and down inside the tank. I would say probably try to keep yourself from having too much like pointy hardscape, because that risks when they're moving around that they could hurt themselves if they're trying to quickly get to the surface. But other than that, yeah, I mean, they're pretty simple from everything I've ever read on them, or like interactions I've had with people like learning about them, like when I go to the fish store. I would say there are far better people to answer those questions than me, though. One person you might try would be somebody like Rachel O'Leary. She keeps a lot of like nanofish and stuff, and like African dwarf frogs are kind of fall into that realm. That's probably one of the best people to ask questions on that I can think of off the top of my head. And then maybe I think who else is like a nano keeper that would do African dwarf frogs. Probably, I mean, Dan from Dan's Fish should probably give you a really good answer, honestly, just because that guy knows about, I swear, like everything. With some few exceptions. Rainbows are about one of the few things he doesn't know as well. But I still like him anyway. He's a good guy. Emily Stevens, who remembers collecting Pogs, I'm pretty sure. I think Autocorrect got you. And Slammers. Man, I could tell you stories about that too, but I don't want to like ramble on forever. But I'll do the short version. There were two brothers who came over from Hawaii and basically brought Pogs to the mainland of the Seattle area and then spread it from there. That was when I used to do sports cards on the weekends. So I met those guys, super nice dudes. They taught me how to play back when I was a kid. I still have like a binder that's like this thick full of all sorts of what was rare and collectible Pogs back in the day. I mean, they're worth nothing now, but it's just an era of my youth that I remember very fondly. So I'm in that boat. I remember them quite well. Wow. Chat jumping on me. That's how you know I'm way behind. I've been rambling too much. There's one question I really wanted to get, and it just like bounced right as I was starting to read it. All right, there we go. Darlene's Tanks. I'm not a scientist. I was using Easy Green as directed on the bottle. Algae hit me hard. Stopped using it. Algae went away. Now scared of it. Should I half the dose or So it really depends on your tank and your planting. I would say start with like half the dose, or what I actually like doing with any all-in-one personally. Let's say that it tells you to dose once or twice a week, depending on your light. What I take is the total amount I'm going to dose in a week, and I spread it out over multiple days. So maybe what I'll do is like, I'll only dose Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or I'll dose every day of the week, or I'll dose every day, whatever it may be. I'll spread it out so it's a smaller amount more continuously. That tends to be something that allows the plants to absorb it more significantly and reduce the chance for algae outgrowth to occur and to have those big outbreaks like you were dealing with. And you could start by having the dose, or let's say you got a 40-gallon tank, right? You're low light, so you're gonna go only 4 pumps a week. Every other day, just do 1 pump. And don't worry about it from there, right? Something simple and easy to remember where it's like, okay, did I do fertilizer yesterday? No, then I do 1 pump today, right? Something like that. It depends on the size of your tank. Feel free to shoot me an email, Darlene. It's just bentley.pasco@gmail.com. I'll put it in chat again just to help. Gotta type. Shoot me an email. If you can give me a little bit extra details about your tank, I can probably help you fine tune that a little bit and figure out exactly what's going to work good for you as a little tester. And I think you'll see if you spread that dose out over several days, the likelihood of you getting algae is way, way lower, and your plants will actually do significantly better at the same time because they have continuous food to get from instead of like big spike of food, drought, big spike, drought, right? It helps. Oh, I always do this wrong. I want to say Olivier. I hope that's right, but if it's Oliver, just in case. Here in Montreal, I have 2 fish stores that I love. I really love one of them because of the workers there, but it is not really inviting. Then the other one is. Sure, I can understand that. Part of why I go to one of the stores I go to is because of the people working there. They're so fantastic that I can't like help but want to go there. And so very typically what I will do is I use that place to buy not necessarily fish, but I'll buy supplies. So I'm still spreading my money around a little bit and making sure that I support several local stores because I want all these businesses to do well. But I don't necessarily put all of my money potentially in like one spot, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think it's perfectly fine to like want to go to a place because you like the staff, just as long as they do the rest of the things they need to do, like keep the fish healthy and all that kind of stuff. Joe Davis, once this pandemic goes over, I would love to meet up and offer a duck and hoisin pizza. No mushrooms. I'm not a big fan of ducks, but I would try it. It's a little too greasy a protein for me. I'm so weird. I've tried. There's certain things I like. Like I've had bison burgers, and those are fantastic. I've had ostrich, that was pretty good. But like my only experiences with duck has always been like Peking duck. And it's always kind of been greasy, and I'm not really a big fan of it. And I've had elk, and it was way too gamey for me. But random things that you try in your life, right? You get interested and you're like, I'll try that. But I'm also of the opinion like, don't try things only once and run away. Like try them a couple times when it comes to especially food. Like don't be afraid to try food multiple times unless you're like allergic or you get violently ill. Yeah, live outside your comfort zone. Try something. You never know what you're gonna find and love next time. Okay, a little more. So the other one is a reverse situation. Really, really nice store. They even have quarantine in the basement for all the fish, but the workers there are younger and some are learning. Yeah, but it's interesting because like you could support each of those stores in different ways, right? The one that has the good quarantine, the really, really nice stuff, you could buy fish from them. And then the one where it's the people you really like, you could buy your dry goods from them. And you're basically supporting both stores that you like, but just in different ways. And you're basically maximizing what you expect out of each store. So if the one that you think treats the fish the best, and you're going to have the best quality fish, if you buy fish from them and you buy the other things you need from the other store, bang, bang. It like maximizes stuff and makes sure that everybody's got their job. Chubby Guppy, yes, we need that. I agree, man. I want to meet up with a bunch of people. I would love to be able to just like go to a fish convention and just chatter all day. But, human malware is a thing. I'm looking forward to, I think, Aquashella Chicago, just because being in the kind of middle of the country makes it a little easier to access for a lot of people that I'm likely to see at a convention. I don't want to do Florida because of the time of year they're trying to do it, and I generally am not a fan of Florida's weather, especially where it's going to be. But, you know, say what you will. It's just not my jam. And then I think Dallas is the other one, right? If that wasn't like in the spring or summer, where it was like, if it was more in winter where it's going to be cooler, I'd probably be interested in it. But I don't know, I think Chicago is probably the one that I will go to of all of them, just because it seems like more people travel to Chicago than any of the other ones. Unless we get a sweet, sweet rainbow fish convention, then I'm probably going to be there. Paul Soltero talking about the Stenkar discus that come out of like super high pH water. Had the JCMP lights for 2 months, liking them. That's good to know. I do like those JCMPs. Like, I got to film the last little bits. I've got a video this Saturday I think a lot of people are going to like. I hope, because you guys liked my angelfish video. So we'll see if you like the one I got this Saturday. EJ Fishes 76. Those blue Hawaiian guppies are still going strong. Yeah, man, they make lots of babies. I really like a lot of certain guppies that just like look beautiful and also are nice and prolific, but tend to be a little more hardy. I've had several guppies that are not so hardy that I've tried out, and just like, man, it's such a kick in the teeth when you're like, yeah, I want to breed this guppy, and then like, oh, it turns out like the parents are like murder machines that kill all their children off unless you're like really managing them hardcore, and it's like, that's too much work for me. I just want them to like naturally produce things with cover and be okay. Then the blue Hawaiians are amazing at that. Plus, they look fantastic in a planted tank. And maybe that's just because I really love the color blue, but yeah. I'm telling my daughter to date a fisherman for the same reason, Andre Ellis. Yeah, man. I mean, if you're just gonna go out and fish, you're probably not interacting with many other women. They're probably not leaving you anytime soon. That's some of the little wisdoms I get in life. I can't help it, man. Can't help it. It's just, some of them just make me smile. Some of them are actually like really usable. Dave O, I need a smart app operated light for my Flex 15. Do you know of such a thing? My Flex 32 spoiled me. Well, I mean, if you take the lid off, you could do lots of things, right? You could get like the nano plant, the little like square type light. You could get something like a smaller Aqua Sky. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of tough. I just put mine on a timer. So all I did was just, I set up the light the way I want it, and then I just put mine on one of those like Casa Wi-Fi timers. Solved it. I just have it on this because I'm testing it, but it's still on the same Wi-Fi timer that my top light is, and this pretty soon will get taken off and it'll go back to having a lid, because I have, as you can probably see from the small chamber over here, this was full 3 days ago. This is one of the few things I hate about the Flex. And basically the water level in the tank still looks good, because it's all the evaporation is just taking more water out of the rear chamber because of the way that like the pump and the flow works. It's like the only like downside I have to that tank. Otherwise, I quite like the Flex a lot. Nirvana Aquatics. To be honest, car guys like to act like they get laid, but that's another demographic that generally doesn't cheat. Well, I grew up in a hot rod shop, so I know quite well what that was like. And yeah, you know, my dad is a car dude, and obviously, like, I was named for a car. Like, how much of a car nut do you have to be to name your son after a car? Especially an expensive English one. But yeah, no, I mean, like, I've go to hot rod shows almost every year. I haven't in the last like couple of years, mostly because either I'm working too much or to the pandemic. But man, it's mostly just like, it's like 99% old dudes hanging out with their hot rods. And then, you know, what few women are there, it's almost always like the one that's attached to that guy and has been married to him for like 40 years or whatever. Ruth, anime conventions were like that back in the 90s. Yes, they were. I used to go to anime conventions back in the 90s. They were fun though. They were fun. But yeah, full of like 800 dudes and like 3 women. So they're guaranteed the worst place to ever try and get a date. Jason Irizarry? Man, I actually want to know how to properly pronounce your last name. That's a cool looking last name. Hi, Bentley. How about the NYC Greater Aquarium Society when we finally go back to regular meetings, first Wednesday of the month? Nice. We're so far from going back to regular meetings here in Seattle. I would love to, though. I miss having my fish club meetings. I love just hanging out with fish nerds. It's because I chatter too much and I love talking about fish, but that's why I have live streams, right? I get to talk with all you wonderful folks about fish. All right. Samuel Mendoza, have you ever kept hooker ace? I'm sure there's actually a better, proper way to pronounce that, but that's how I've always pronounced it, and I know it's wrong. But deal with me. Moss. No, I'm not a big moss guy. So I haven't kept lots of varieties of moss, and part of that is just because most of my diversity in plants I've focused elsewhere so far. Moss is something I'm only more recently starting to look at some of the more interesting mosses to try. So like right now I have what's it? Probactiana? It has a really, really complicated name. I'm gonna try and look it up. It's a real weird moss, but anyway, I don't want to spend too much time looking up. I want to get the last couple questions before we end here because Mr. Black, Dr. Black, let's be specific, Dr. Black is coming up next, and I don't want to cut into his stream time too much. Let's see here. Speaking of, he's in chat. What's up, buddy? Better find some trousers. Just camera from the way up. It's way easier. Way easier. Oh man. So let's see. I'll try and find one or two more questions. Bentley, how do you stop defects in guppies without adding new fish to the strain? So this gets a little complicated, and yet it's very simple at the same time. The biggest thing is just you have to cull. You have to pull the defective ones out ASAP. As soon as you see the defect, you remove them. And unfortunately, like, you know, that can feel really terrible. But what I have found to be the easiest is have kind of as Regina here is saying, or I'm sorry, not Regina. Although I like what you're talking about because you're talking about your local tap plier. And you're talking to Mr. Singh, who's super knowledgeable. But Mr. Singh, actually, culling and rehoming deformed fish to a retirement tank is what he does. That's what I do. So I actually have some guppies hidden in a few tanks that you may never actually see because they tend to hide a lot. Because they're in with rainbows, and those rainbows are super active. But most of my my color culls or some of my body culls, I don't kill them. I move them to other tanks, and I just let them live out their lives. Just typically the ones with some kind of genetic defect don't live nearly as long. But yeah, you just have to cull them out of where you're breeding to make sure that those genetics don't keep passing on, and you just keep with the same strong genetics you can get to. But sometimes it's tough, and sometimes you do have to diversify a little bit. And sometimes that just means getting more fish from the original person you got them from, kind of going higher up the generation chart, and instead of relying purely on what you started with. It can be tough. Admittedly, it's very, very tough. But fish can go, it's something like 400 or 500 generations before you start running into issues with inbreeding. So just keep that in mind. It's not as horrible as you might think it is. Krager's Fish. I took your advice and switched to a sump on my 225-gallon Frontosa tank. I'm starting to notice some floating white foam in the chamber with the plants. Potential problem. Not likely. What you're probably dealing with is just enough extra mineral content from the way that you have to keep the Frontosas, right? Because I'm assuming that you're using some stuff to buffer a little bit. And that hardness as it gets super oxygenated. Think about how protein skimmers work in salt water. can cause that kind of foam at the top. Basically, you just skim that away, and it's a lot of like the gunk that you don't necessarily want in your water that's adhering to oxygen. That's actually how protein skimmers work, right? They use these super fine micro bubbles of air that capture a lot of the harmful chemicals naturally and bring them up and create this foam. And that stuff is just basically all the pollutants you don't want in the water in an easy to deal with foam, as opposed to having to do like harder levels of chemical filtration. I wish we could do skimming in freshwater because it would be hyper efficient. But the problem is, because it doesn't have the same density that salt water does, it's almost impossible to create the foam the way you need to in the skimming unit itself to actually separate all the stuff like you would in salt water. But there are people that have done it. I've seen it. It's very, very interesting. And it's like it's like literally voodoo witchcraft if you get it running. It's amazing. Okay, gang. Oh, I pronounced it correctly. Jason's last name. Sometimes I get them right, and then sometimes with, like, especially French, I butcher it horrifically. But, the broken clock's right twice a day, right? Sometimes you get them right. Yeah, Joe Davis saying that the Canadian Rainbow Fish Convention got shut down early past year is heartbreaking. Yeah, but I mean, it's for the safety of everybody, right? It's right in the start of the pandemic. Is really scary, so it needed to be done. But hopefully, once everything goes back to normal, which who knows how long it's going to be, but once it goes back to normal, they will be doing that convention as a replacement. I know that I've had a couple conversations with Gary Lang over the last year, and every time basically he's like been like, hey, if they do that convention, are you going? He's like really like needling me, just like go. Anyway, let me get a quick link to Dr. Black. We're gonna call it a night here, folks, because I don't want to ruin his stream. He's my buddy, my Australian buddy. Really, YouTube. I want to get the direct link to your stream. That's the one I'm looking for. Bam, look at that smiling face. If you want to keep on the fish party train, so to speak, go check out Dr. Black. He's a blast. Krager's Fish, thank you so much for the super chat for $2. Appreciate it. Never required. I love answering questions. I'm a psycho like that. And as long as I can keep it manageable, I'll do so. For everybody who showed up, thanks for my Randall. Thanks for the people who in chat participated to let me know how their fish stores are going and why they like certain local fish stores, all that kind of stuff. It's fantastic. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much for your information and participating, all that kind of stuff. For those who are watching the replay, if you got this far, let me know in the comments. Really appreciate it. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. And stay awesome. Oh, yeah, YouTube stuff. Like, comment, subscribe, blah, 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 blah.